I wasn't looking for trouble that day, I just wanted a burger and a break from work. But what I saw in that bar shattered 2 marriages, including my own. This whole thing kicked off on a day I would have never expected. It started in a place I normally wouldn't be caught dead in. I had just dropped off one of our most irritating clients at the airport. He'd spent the entire ride droning on about the most trivial things, and by the time he got out, I had a pounding headache. I wasn't in any rush to head back to the office either. It was one of those gray, listless Tuesdays, and the thought of spending the afternoon buried in contract revisions wasn't exactly thrilling. So instead of going straight back, I pulled into this dull-looking bar and grill about a mile from the airport. I figured I'd grab a slow lunch and a cold beer or two before facing the rest of the day. I parked myself in a booth, nursing my drink and silently wondering why it's so hard to find a burger that's actually worth a damn anymore. That's when I noticed a couple walking into the restaurant. They sat down together across the room, close enough for me to get a good look. The woman was blonde, wearing a short skirt that made it impossible not to notice her legs, and a tight pink top that left little to the imagination. Her partner? He looked like he was trying way too hard to be some sort of tough guy, leather jacket, ripped jeans, that whole cliché. But the guy was too scrawny, and the way he carried himself was more awkward than intimidating. Now here's where it gets real. The blonde? That was Michelle, my sister-in-law. And the guy she was getting cozy with? That definitely wasn't my brother, Brian. Worse than that, it was immediately obvious this wasn't just a friendly lunch. They ordered drinks, and before long they were all over each other, kissing, groping, acting like they were the only ones in the room. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. After a minute I stood up, walked over to their booth, and with the calmest voice I could muster I said, "Well, hey there, Michelle. Fancy seeing you here." The reaction was almost cartoonish. Her eyes went wide like she'd seen a ghost, and her sleazy friend snapped his hands back like he'd touched a hot stove, turning to look at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. Michelle's face cycled through surprise, disbelief, and then full-on shock. Her jaw hung open and she just sat there, frozen. As for the guy, his face twisted from startled to annoyed, and before he could get a word out, I beat him to it. "So," I said, keeping my tone steady, "how've you been? How's Brian doing?" Then I turned to her boyfriend, extended a hand, and added just loud enough to sting, "It's good to see you, Michelle." I had all kinds of guesses running through my head, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear. I mean, I figured there had to be some explanation, maybe even something shady, but not this. I've got to hand it to Michelle, though. If nothing else, she's got a vivid imagination. She didn't flinch. Just looked straight at me and said, "I'm serious, Will." She's been seeing this guy from the gym for at least a couple of weeks now. Her confidence threw me off for a second. I wasn't ready for how certain she sounded. But in my mind it just couldn't be true. Andrea and I had been together since college, Kenyon sophomore year. We moved in right after graduation and we'd been married ever since. Still trying to wrap my head around it, I fired back with some sarcasm. "So is this Robbie guy the only one who's been getting your attention, or are we talking about a whole lineup here?" Her face flushed as she answered quickly, "Just him." I didn't buy it for a second. About 20 minutes later I was driving back to the office, my thoughts spiraling. I couldn't stop thinking about Brian's marriage, wondering if it was already over. And now, for the first time, I found myself seriously questioning my own. Now, you'd think the first person I'd call would be Brian, to tell him what I saw Michelle doing. But I couldn't do it. I'd always been the reliable older brother, the one who kept things steady. And something about breaking that illusion just felt too heavy in that moment. I flashed back to something Andrea had said just a few weeks earlier. She was standing in the kitchen, smiling like she'd won a little victory, and told me, "You know those black slacks you like? They were getting tight on me, but now they fit just right." She said it with pride, glowing almost. And looking at her then, I was hit with how beautiful she still was, and how much I still loved her. That memory hit me hard. If she really was seeing someone else, I didn't know what that would do to me. Or to her. God help us both. But the truth? My marriage didn't end with a court filing. Not really. It ended exactly 1 week later. Another Tuesday. Michelle and I had put a plan together by then. I'd picked up a small voice recorder and she hid it in her living room, saying she'd try to get Andrea talking, get her to open up. Turns out Michelle was better at this than I expected. She played her part perfectly, easygoing, curious, a little teasing. She even laughed when Andrea admitted Robbie wasn't her first. "He's just the most recent, not the best," she chuckled. Then she mentioned some guy named Ellis who'd moved away, and acted all shocked about it, like it was some wild little secret they were sharing. Michelle was almost enjoying the whole thing. But hearing that recording, it didn't hit me as hard as you might think. By that point I already knew what kind of person Michelle was. And as for Andrea, hearing those details, ugly as they were, actually helped. It gave me what I needed to finally admit to myself that she had betrayed me. That same afternoon I ran into Patty from accounting in the hallway. I was barely holding it together, but she gave me this big, sunny smile. "Hey Will," she said cheerfully. "What's got you looking so serious?" "I've got a full-blown case of BTF today." I had no idea what that meant, but I forced a smile anyway. That moment, like so many others, just floated by while the world I thought I knew kept falling apart. I blinked and asked, "BTF?" Patty giggled, glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in and whispered, "Big tool fever." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, then proceeded to tell me all about her situation with Martin. Apparently, he was incredible in bed, confident, wild, and in her words, ridiculously well endowed. She claimed it made her lose her mind every time. It had all started with harmless flirting, but then one afternoon he caught her off guard, turned the charm up to 11 and lured her into his office. From that point on, they were tangled up in a full-blown affair. She admitted that the first few times were casual, even exciting. Martin gave me a quick wink one day and tossed a flirt my way too, but he never crossed the line with me. I told myself that whatever had happened was over, I'd moved past it. But I was wrong. About a week later I was caught off guard again. We were alone near the benches and somehow, he maneuvered me into touching him. Within moments we were back in his office, and the whole cycle had started again. Michelle finished relaying what Andrea had said on the recording, her voice taking on this dreamy tone. Andrea had apparently sighed and said, "I can't even explain it. I love being with Will. Our sex life has always been satisfying, but with Martin." That part of the tape was hard to hear. Not just for the words, but for the casual way she said them, like she wasn't even thinking about me. I took the recording to Margaret, my attorney. We listened to the first minute, and then she quietly picked up her phone and told her assistant, "Hold all my calls." We sat there in silence once the tape ended. Then she looked at me and said, "All right. What's your plan?" I didn't hesitate. "I want a divorce. Not some watered-down, irreconcilable differences type of thing. Adultery. Straight and simple. I'll be fair about the money, we can split the savings, but I'm keeping the house. And she needs to take her maiden name back." She gave up the right to be Mrs. Will Harris the day she walked into Martin's office. Margaret gave a slow nod, her expression unreadable. Understood. That afternoon I distracted myself with logistics. I called a locksmith and scheduled him for 4:30 to change the locks. I made dinner plans with Brian so I wouldn't be home when Andrea came back. I also canceled her credit cards, opened separate bank accounts for her, and then sat down to write her a note. It took several drafts. No one teaches you how to say goodbye to someone you've loved for half your life. No script, no template, just your broken thoughts and a pen. But eventually I got through it. I sealed it in an envelope and left it where she'd find it. Later, when Brian and I met up, I handed him the tape Michelle had recorded. He looked at me tired, confused. "We don't usually talk to each other like this," he said. "But, okay. What do you need me to hear?" I didn't say much. Just placed the tape on the table and told him, "Just listen. I'll be in the other room." I wound the tape back to the beginning, slid the recorder over to Brian, and left the room without saying a word. He gave me a puzzled look, but I couldn't bring myself to sit there while he listened. I knew what was coming and I didn't need to hear it again. At first, all I could hear from the other room was the low hum of voices, Andrea and Michelle, recorded like ghosts in conversation. Then came a loud crash and I knew Brian had probably hurled something against the wall. Once he'd sent Andrea her own copy of the tape, the usual, "It's not what you think," line stopped coming from her. Instead, her lawyer tried a new angle, claiming the tape wasn't legally admissible. Margaret didn't even blink at that. She just sat there calmly, not giving an inch. As the court date got closer, Andrea's attorney finally reached out to Margaret asking for a settlement discussion. The day after he listened to the recording, Brian packed a bag, left his apartment and moved into my guest room. That evening he drove by his old place, waited until Andrea left, then called me. Together we boxed up everything that belonged to him and got it out of there. Later on, Andrea's lawyer came back with a proposal. I would meet with Andrea privately before we finalized the paperwork, and in exchange they asked me to drop the adultery claim from the divorce. I told Margaret I was open to seeing Andrea, hearing her out, but I wasn't about to drop the adultery grounds just to make things cleaner. Eventually we settled on a compromise. If she could somehow convince me to change it, we'd reclassify the divorce under irreconcilable differences, that old, tidy fallback. In some strange way, I was actually curious to hear what she had to say. Maybe that makes me a fool, but after a decade together, part of me needed closure. I couldn't just walk away from someone I'd loved for so long without hearing her try. I kept imagining a role reversal. What if I'd met some random woman, someone with nothing going for her except physical appeal, and started sleeping with her behind Andrea's back? No emotional connection, no love, just lust. Would Andrea be able to forgive that? Could she look past the betrayal, the pain, the haunting self-doubt that comes from feeling like you were never enough for the person you trusted most? Those thoughts kept circling in my head over and over. Meanwhile, Brian was slowly regaining his confidence. Even with everything Michelle had done to him, he started coming back into his own. We hit the town a few times, and to be honest, we weren't exactly lacking in female company. Brian had this one move he loved pulling. It was actually kind of brilliant in a dumb way. He'd spot two attractive women sitting at a table, look at me and say, "Watch this." And honestly, about 3 out of 4 times it worked. Brian had a way of making things happen. He'd spot two women at a table, flash me a grin, and without missing a beat, march right over. With that smooth charm of his, he'd say, "Excuse me, ladies. I know it's strange to accept a drink from a total stranger, so let me introduce my brother. This here is Will Harris." Then he'd step back, leaving the rest to me. More often than not, it worked. That move led to 4 amazing evenings with someone I didn't expect. She was thoughtful, gentle, and for a little while she helped me forget the pain. But like all good things, it ended. She left the next afternoon, and her absence hit me harder than I let on. Brian noticed. "You doing okay, bro?" he asked. "Come on, it's time to meet some new ladies." I just looked at him and said quietly, "She was special." "I believe you," he replied. "I liked her too. But she's gone now, Will. And we've got 10 more days left here. I'm not ready to stop enjoying life just yet." With that, he dragged me off to the tennis court, then we hit the pool. That evening, we struck up a conversation with a pair of secretaries from San Francisco, both out celebrating a birthday weekend. It was light, it was fun, just what I needed. But even in those lighter moments, the memories would creep back in. One night, I got a message from Andrea. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered. "I'm not doing great, Will," she admitted. "I miss you every day. You probably can't imagine what it felt like to be in your arms again." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, silent, letting the music in the background drift through the stillness. She continued, "Do you ever wonder if you made the right choice? Because I do. A lot. I try not to, but I keep thinking maybe you made the wrong call. Maybe we gave up too soon." Later that week, after I dropped Brian off somewhere, he turned to me and said, "You hanging in there?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had rebuilt enough of a life to carry on, but parts of me still ached. My dad helped get me back on my feet after everything fell apart. He brought me into his carpentry business, and that's where I picked up the trade. Building something with your hands, it helps. Grounds you. Nell came into my life quietly. She works part-time at a doctor's office 3 days a week, handling insurance records and patient files. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the family afloat. She's not flashy, just honest, grounded, real. About 5 feet 4 inches, around 140 pounds. She carries some extra weight like I do, but it suits her. Especially after having 2 kids. One evening, I came home with a laundry basket in my hands, walking down the hall, when I heard someone upstairs hurrying down. "Oh, you're home," Nell said, her face pale and anxious. "What's going on?" I asked. "I had to rush to the school. Brad wasn't feeling well," she said. "And now? I don't think I'm feeling great either. I'm heading to bed." "All right," I replied gently, watching her go. The house went quiet again. As I walked down the hallway, I called out to Nell, trying to keep my voice even. "What's going on? Why aren't you sleeping in our bed?" Her voice came from behind the door, muffled but sharp. "I don't want to risk giving you the flu. And I know you wouldn't want to pass it to your lover either." That hit like a punch to the chest. I stopped in my tracks, stunned. Is this what we're doing now? Throwing cheap shots? She stepped into view then, pale and tense. "Do you want a divorce?" she asked. "No," I said truthfully. "I still love you." She crossed her arms. "Well, he's married too. 3 kids just like us. We're in the same kind of situation. He can't leave his family, but he needs love just like you do." My voice was quiet but steady. "You think I'm going to stand by while you give yourself to another man? That I'll stay here and pretend this is okay?" She didn't answer. I took a breath and said, "You should know, I spoke to a lawyer yesterday after you went to bed. He told me that a divorce in this state? It's not going to be easy on you. It'll be expensive, Emotionally, financially, all of it. You won't just lose the marriage. You'll lose a lot more. Over the next couple of days, I took the steps I never thought I'd have to take. I visited my parents and told them everything. They were heartbroken, angry even, but they supported me. They knew I wasn't doing this out of spite. Then I went to see Nell's parents. I told them what was happening in our marriage. The shock on their faces was genuine. They couldn't believe what she'd done, how much it risked, how deeply it hurt our family. After that, I called our insurance agent and family attorney. I updated the beneficiaries on my policy and made adjustments to my will. It was time to protect what was mine, and our kids. When I came home, I told her, I've already spoken to the insurance company. Both sets of parents know what's been going on. They know what you proposed. I don't think anyone's exactly in your corner right now. Her face twisted and she snapped, if you walk away, I'll get a lawyer. I'll drag you into court. You can't abandon me and the kids. She said the last part like an afterthought, like it was a strategy, not a real concern. You can do what you want, I said calmly. But I won't be here. And finding me? That might take more money than you've got. Some time passed. One afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store where she was still working as a cashier. I didn't even realize it was her line until I was placing my items on the belt. When she looked up and saw me, the color drained from her face. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked her in the eye and asked, "So, are you enjoying the life you chose?" She opened her mouth as if to answer, but never got the words out. She fainted right there at the register. I walked out of that store without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw Nell. Now, for something else entirely, a second story that unfolded on a bitter cold Tuesday evening in mid-November. Bruce Finley was still holed up in his office long after the building had emptied out. He was working on a complicated contract that had to be finished by Friday. Bruce wasn't the kind of guy who typically put things off. He liked being ahead of schedule and he figured he could still get it wrapped up on time. He had no idea that his night was about to spiral into chaos. It all happened so fast. A blur. One moment he was reading through a paragraph, the next he was being thrown into a whirlwind of confusion and pain. The attack came out of nowhere, swift and brutal. Bruce couldn't identify who was behind it. He caught only a vague glimpse of the person, a shadow of a man shorter than him but stockier. Everything else was a fog. The first thing Bruce felt as he began to regain consciousness was pain, everywhere. It throbbed in his head, in his chest, in places he couldn't even name. He let out a soft groan, disoriented, unable to hear clearly. Slowly, sounds began to return. Distant traffic. A car horn. Life outside moving along, indifferent to his misery. And then, sharp and sudden, he felt a stinging slap across his cheek. The impact jolted him, and his vision started to clear just enough to make out the man looming over him. "Bruce? Bruce, wake up, you stupid weasel. Can you hear me?" The voice was rough, impatient. The man stared at Bruce with cold, focused intensity, someone clearly on a mission. He seemed to know a lot. He knew Bruce was a decent enough attorney with a respectable firm in the city. He made a solid living, not rich but comfortable. He had a family. A wife. Kids. And while Bruce wasn't some villain, the stranger clearly didn't think highly of his ego. The attacker started pacing, frustrated, clearly trying to make a point. "Let's talk about your wife. You think Bridget might be angry enough to hire someone like me? Do you think she'd pay me to send a little message like this?" Bruce's heart sank. "Bridget?" he repeated, startled. "How do you?" His voice faltered, cut off by the icy glare of the man in front of him. He tried again, this time more cautiously. "She gets mad sometimes, sure. But she'd never do something like this. Never." "I haven't," Bruce mumbled, his voice fading until it disappeared altogether. The man, Hogan, let out a low chuckle, not one of amusement but of cold, calculated sympathy. Like he understood but didn't care. "If you haven't packed up and left gracefully by the end of January," Hogan said, his voice even, "I'll make sure it's far less graceful." There was no need to clarify the threat. Bruce knew exactly what would happen if he didn't comply, and he knew Hogan was more than capable of making good on it. Maybe it was time to get out of town. Maybe a quiet job at a small firm in the suburbs, or out of the city entirely, wouldn't be so bad. Hogan seemed to read his thoughts. "You'll land on your feet. I've heard you're decent at your job. You'll get a reference. It'll take you a few years to climb back up to where you were, but you'll get there." The grin Hogan gave him next sent a chill down Bruce's spine. "And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not, your wife has more money than you do. Which gives you plenty of reasons to stay quiet." Bruce just stared at him, numb. He hadn't even gotten to the stage of planning revenge. The idea never even took shape. Hogan had shut that door before it opened. "One last thing," Hogan added, glancing at his watch. "Then our night will be complete." He leaned in almost like he was giving directions. "You should get going. You've got a meeting at the Hilton. Wouldn't want to be late, not when my soon-to-be ex-wife is expecting you." Bruce's head jerked up. "What? Why would I?" Hogan just smiled coolly. "Because that's what's next. Just follow the schedule." Elsewhere, the scene shifted to something softer. This year's pet exhibition was set up in Central Park. Dozens of little tables and booths lined the grass, each featuring a different breed, accessory, or training display. There was even a makeshift track laid out with carpet where they trotted the dogs back and forth for demonstrations. Snack stalls and ice cream vendors filled the air with sweet smells. Regina had decided to take our 5-year-old granddaughter Jessica to the event. Grandma's mission was simple: spoil her senseless. And Jessica, though small, had a sharp eye. She seemed to understand more than most kids her age, and she definitely knew how to work her charm when she wanted something, especially from Grandma. Regina still made time for herself too. She'd been doing her best to keep the years from showing, visiting salons, staying active, keeping up her confidence. But if I'm being honest, there was one moment long ago that had left a mark. It was about 15 years back. We were at my cousin's wedding in another city, and the wine had been flowing freely. Too freely. Regina had fallen for the attention of one of the other guests. Said he was a good dancer, and for a while that was all it seemed to be. But I knew better. That man wasn't dancing for the joy of it. He had something else in mind. I confronted him. We had words. Regina and I had an argument later that night. It never came to anything, but it never quite faded either. Back in the present, Regina looked at me suddenly and asked, "Where'd you go just now?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled, not unkindly. "You looked like you got lost in thought." "I've been here the whole time," I told her, trying to sound casual. Regina looked at me, puzzled. "That's not what I meant. You looked like you were somewhere else entirely. What were you thinking about? Did something come up? Did you find something strange at the store?" She moved to the oven and pulled out a tray of cupcakes, setting them on the kitchen table. As she began spooning whipped egg whites onto the warm tops, I realized she was dodging my question. It only made me more curious. "I was just imagining," I said slowly, "a little white dog running around the house. Something joyful. Something innocent." But that piece quickly slipped from my mind. My thoughts turned dark again, flashing back to how everything had unraveled with our daughter. The way her husband had betrayed her, it made my blood boil. I wanted to rip that man apart for what he'd done. But he wasn't around. And what my daughter needed in that moment wasn't my anger. She needed comfort. Still, I couldn't stop the fury. "The man's a disgrace," I muttered. "Where's Jessica?" I asked Hannah quietly. "Is she still with him?" "No," she answered. "She's staying at my friend's place tonight. It's Kristen's birthday and they're having a little party. Jessica wanted to sleep over." Regina let out a small breath. Well, at least she didn't have to see what happened. There was a heavy pause. Then she added, "Maybe you should stay with us tonight." Her words felt strange, like she was offering shelter from a storm she helped create. And then there was that night. I completely lost it. I showed up at my son-in-law's place, drunk, furious, and done with talking. I hit him. Again. And again. He didn't even fight back much. Maybe the booze dulled his instincts, maybe he felt guilty. I don't know. All I remember is the pounding in my chest and the exhaustion in my arms. Eventually, I walked out, breathless and furious. But when I got home, I wasn't just angry at him. I was mad at Regina. At my so-called friend. At the world, honestly. It all felt like one huge betrayal, as if everyone around me had been in on something and I was the last one to figure it out. I kept asking myself, why Regina? Why would she do this? And for how long had she been hiding it? I spent days in that haze, barely eating, hardly sleeping. Not crying anymore, just tired. Worn down. My heart broke all over again when I saw my daughter sitting quietly, her face pale from the heartbreak. She'd learned the truth about her husband's betrayal, and that was more than enough for her to deal with. Regina was at the table when I saw her next. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment exactly, but something close to it. Exposure maybe. The weight of secrets unraveling. I didn't know what to say to my daughter, so I just left. Maybe some part of me hoped Regina would finally come clean to her. Say what I couldn't. Be honest. But later that hope felt foolish. Naive. Regina had hidden everything too carefully. If she was going to confess, she would have done it long before I walked away. And yet, I stayed quiet. I left the house, stepped outside and paused on the threshold. The night air was cold against my skin but I couldn't move. I turned back and looked down at him. Adam lay there, completely still. Then, just beside him, I saw the jagged ends of an old root protruding from the earth, darkening as his blood seeped into the soil. It was turning crimson, spreading like ink. That's when it hit me. I might have killed him. A sick wave rolled through my gut. My mind raced. The consequences were immediate and terrifying. Prison. Headlines. My family ripped apart for good. I didn't know how to fix it. I couldn't even breathe properly. All I could think about was how to make sure no one had seen us. My brain started spinning with plans I didn't want to have, where to move the body, how to cover the trail. Then a new thought crept in. Where was David? He had been acting strange and now it seemed he was leaving in a rush. I tried calling him. No answer. Why would he run? Was it fear? Guilt? Or had he known something I hadn't? I didn't let myself linger on that. I went home. There was only one person left who might still give me the truth. Regina was sitting in the living room, visibly shaken. The moment I walked in, she flinched, expecting me to yell or worse. But I didn't. I just sat across from her. Quiet. Watching her. She couldn't meet my eyes. Suddenly, in the tension of the moment, she slipped, stepped back, lost her balance and crashed sideways onto a glass-top table. The glass shattered beneath her and she tumbled onto the shards. And I just stood there, staring at the woman I once loved. The woman who had betrayed all of us. Then I caught movement, out of the corner of my eye. It was her daughter, standing in the doorway, frozen in horror. Her hands flew up to cover her face, unable to look, but unable to run. That image, I'll never forget it. I never wanted her to find out this way. But I had crossed a line and there was no turning back. I collapsed onto the couch, numb. Not sure what to do. Not sure what came next. Regina tried to get up from the floor but the pain sent her down again. She curled into herself, whimpering. Later I learned that Adam had survived. Somehow. And I visited him. Every time I apologized for what I'd done, ashamed, full of regret. He'd just laugh and shake his head. You're just an old fool, he'd say. But at least you were trying to fight for your family's honor. Over time we made peace. And I was grateful for that. Even more surprisingly, Hannah started visiting an old friend of mine. And after a few visits she admitted she liked him. He was older, yes, but steady. Kind. And that made all the difference. As for me, I'd built up some savings over the years quietly. Maybe one day it'll go to my granddaughter for her future. That's all I care about now. Because in the end, it's been a long road. And I've learned that no matter how much pain you carry, if you can find even a sliver of peace, you hold on to it. You don't let go.